I think. Maybe tonight, if not soon. All right. It's not tonight, I don't think. I don't know. Every 4 years, our nation deals with something of a crisis. It's called an election. I don't know if you feel that way, but I feel that way. Every 4 years, it's like, oh man, it's like the Super Bowl on steroids. My team was in the World Series this year, and I cared. But I'm like, man, would you rather have the World Series or the election? And it was kind of a no-brainer. You felt this as a Yankees fan, Paul? It was the election, right? It would have been nice to get both, but the election you really kind of needed. And it felt like winning, when you win an election, it feels like winning a championship sometimes, especially when the stakes, lately the stakes have just been so high. It makes you just want to be like, yes, this is what victory feels like, or something like that, But I remember being anxious about elections going all the way back to the earliest elections I voted in. The earliest election I voted in was probably 1996, if I remember. I think I voted in 1996. But the 2000 election, now some of you guys might be like, wow, 2000, that makes you're old. That might, and the fact is, these years they are starting to kind of be in the rearview mirror. Unfortunately, that's just the reality. I'm still young compared to some of you guys. But I remember that 2000 election, and I remember it was between Bush and Gore, and I was in Bible college, and one of my professors says, hey Steve, don't worry about it. God's man will win. And now I just want to tell you, he was a fatalist. He was a staunch Calvinist and a fatalist, and he believed everything was determined before the foundations of time. And I heartily disagree with his sentiment about that, because would anyone call Obama God's man? Would anyone call Joe Biden? Would anyone say Biden was God's man, or Harris would have been God's man, or person, whatever? These presidents and wanted to be presidents had policies that were completely against what God says. And so I don't even really know. I mean, I understand the sentiment he was trying to share with me. You guys might remember that election. We didn't know who the president was for, what was it, a month or so, 40-some days or something like that. I just remember like, man, who's our president? We don't know who our president is. It was all because of, if I remember, Miami-Dade. Was it Miami-Dade County or the county right north of that with the hanging, what was it? Broward County with the hanging chads. They had pushed the little things, and the chads still hung onto the thing, and they didn't know if those votes were counted or that type of. Kids, imagine young people. We're waiting until 3 a.m. to find out who the president is. Imagine waiting like 40-some. Does anyone know how long that was? It was weeks, right? It was like a month, and there was a court case that followed. It's like, is Gore going to win? And so there was some anxiety going. Now understand, both those people were more centrist. What I mean when I say that, politically speaking, is your right is this direction, right? So you have the political right today, which is way over here. It's what the left would call extreme right. And then you have the left that's completely insane, and they're way over here at this point. But it used to be that the elections were in here somewhere, and all these guys moved to the middle. Who remembers that? Who remembers everybody fought for the middle? That was only like 3 or 4 elections ago. It really wasn't that long ago. Now things are completely different. Now it's like, wow, this really, really matters. Not that it didn't matter before. But as the election goes, so goes the nation. So, when they were fighting for the middle, and that seemed like a big deal, now they're not fighting for the middle. Now they're fighting about whether or not you should call a man a woman or a woman a man, or whether or not a man's allowed to go and punch a woman in the face and call it sports, and whether or not Christian preaching is considered hate speech. And so it's a big deal. If we elect an anti-God leftist, our nation is in trouble, and we'd see more and more opposition towards God's truth in our government, and they'd make policies against believers, and they'd try to limit our free speech. and they'd call Bible preaching hate speech, and the movement over there on the left is really against our right to free speech in some ways, and in so many other ways. But it's a government system and an ideology that is not conducive to the spread of the gospel. That's really where we are at this point, and it's a shame. And I think a lot of people over there have realized that, and they're ashamed of where the party has gone. And they've left. A lot of lifelong Democrats have left because of the complete craziness of where they are at this point. If they don't make a change, it's hard to imagine the Democrat Party surviving. There's part of me that says, I hope they don't change, because how do you survive being that completely crazy? But then the other part is they're convincing people that they're like trying to control how you speak and how you think, and people are falling for it. People are falling for it a little bit. So if we elect a person who cares about God's truth, we get a reprieve. Laws are changed. Government policies become more in line with God's word. I would say sanity comes back. The claim of the Republican Party this last election was like we're the party of common sense. And most of the people in America, a lot of people in America understand what they mean when they say that, because this is common sense. It's what people have understood. It makes sense. Now, I think we, in general, can see where America's ultimately heading as a nation, and I think it's fairly clear that with each generation, we're kind of getting farther away from God. I think that's fair to say and fair to understand, and inevitably speaking, we go the way of some of these other nations, the way some of these other nations have gone, and we basically have already started to turn our back on God and have kicked God out of some stuff. We have a little bit of a reprieve for now, but I think we can see if things don't change, if there isn't a real revival in this nation, I think we could see where this thing's heading. I think we could see where America's heading. Well, the nations of Israel and Judah were in a fairly similar situation of downward decline and downward moral decline. And for over 200 years, Israel had evil, idolatrous kings, and God brought judgment, and he removed Israel from the land. The southern kingdom of Judah had problems as well, except that it had a few good kings kind of peppered in here and there, and those few good kings allowed it to kind of continue a bit longer and allowed God's grace to continue to be extended to them. But lately, the kings of Judah haven't been so great. We're looking at the kings on the right side of this screen. Lately, to be a king of Judah was almost a death sentence. One king after another has been assassinated, and the last king that we saw was Ahaz. We see him second to last on the list here, and he worshipped and served false gods. Ahaz was a terrible king. He even offered his own son to Molech as a burnt offering. This is one of the worst guys in the South. He was, as one guy calls it, a dedicated polytheist. And when he had problems, you might remember that he had problems with Syria and Israel. So he had problems with Syria and Israel. We're talking about the king of Judah. And do you remember, he was told in Isaiah 7 to place his trust in the Lord, and where did he place his trust? Syria, way up in the Syrians in the north, the Assyrians. And so instead of turning to the Lord, he turns to those Assyrians. He ends up building an idolatrous altar in the house of the Lord, but in the end, he dies, and his son Hezekiah takes his place. And so at this point in Judah's history, we've seen the fall of Israel, and we ask the question, what kind of king will Hezekiah be? Will he be a good ruler or an evil one? Will he change the path that Judah is heading toward, or will he lead them on the path to destruction? Will he bring revival? Will he bring the people back to the Lord? And also, will he save Judah from the threat of Assyria? His father brings Assyria into the picture, and guess who public enemy number one is for Judah once you bring Assyria? Once Assyria wipes out Israel, and once they wipe out Syria, now they're looking at you. And so you basically just invited your worst enemy into town. Will Hezekiah save Judah from that threat? All these questions are going to be answered over the next several weeks. But today we take a look at the beginning of his rule. Notice the beginning and length of Hezekiah's rule. Now, it came about in the 3rd year of Hoshea. Now, before we really focus, the 3rd year of Hoshea, if we look at our chart, we look at the right side at the bottom, Hoshea's first year is what? 732. That means his second year is 732, 731. The second year would be 731, 730, and the third year would be 730, 729. We're calling it 729. Okay, so we're going to say the 3rd year, 729. You see that reflected on the right side. Hezekiah's reign begins in 729. Now it came about in the 3rd year of Hoshea, the son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, became king. And on our chart, we're going to see Hezekiah. He is the son of Ahaz. All right, he's next in line to the throne in Ahaz. He was 25 years old when he became king. And he reigns 29 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. So we have some interesting things going on here. So what we see a reign here of 29 years, 29-year reign. Now, if he reigned 29 years and we start at 729, when would his reign end? It would end 700. So we're seeing a different chronology here. The 29 years doesn't begin at 729. The 29 years begins when he starts his sole reign. So again, this is a dynamic we see all the time in 1st and 2nd Kings. So from 735 to from 729 till his father dies in 715, he's ruling with his father. And the 29 years starts in 715. If you added 29 years to 715, you're going to end up at 686. So that's kind of how that gets figured out. Now, when I read it, I say, oh, he's 25 years old, okay, when he became king. But if he's 25 years old in 729, then he's the same age as his dad. So he's 25 years old in 715 when he begins his sole rule. So it's like when you're looking at this, these guys don't really work with chronology the exact same way that we do. They don't care about it the same way we do. In one verse, you're kind of starting in 729. In the other verse, you're starting in 715. You're measuring against, in one sentence, against the entirety of his rule, and another sentence against just the sole reign. So don't get all hung up on that. It's not that big of a thing. If you got lost in some of that, it's not super important to understand the point of our passage. But I say that because some liberal will come in and say, hey, look, these numbers don't work out. And, understand there's the entirety of his reign, and then there's the sole rule. And so you have to look at these numbers against which one the writer's talking about. And we know, hey, look, obviously he wasn't 25 in 729 because that means his dad was like 3 when he was born. That doesn't quite work out that way. He was young, his dad was young, like 15 or something, but not 3 when he was born. Understand people had families a lot younger in those days. But anyway, one thing I do notice here that matters to me, that makes sense to me, that kind of sets the stage for what's coming, kind of starts to fill the picture. Yeah, we have the years, we have the timeline, we know how long he rules. But it's interesting that a point is made that his mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. According to 2 Chronicles 29:1, her name is Abijah or Abiyah. And does anyone remember? Now we're going back a good ways. We're going back to like the early years of the divided kingdom. There was a king named Abijah, and I told you what that meant. Does anyone remember what that name means? Anyone remember? We're going back months, maybe a year. You want a hint? Do we want a hint? All right, we're gonna focus on, we're gonna say Abiyah. And Ab is the same as Av, which is father. That's your hint. Yahweh is my father. That's how that kind of works. This is the first person possessive pronoun, suffix, whatever. The Lord is my God. So it's interesting that that's kind of mentioned here, and I look at it and I say, let's remember who was Hezekiah's father? Ahaz. Was he a good dude? Was he like the worst dude that kind of we've seen so far in the South? So Hezekiah's mom's name is Abi, the daughter of Zechariah, and I'm looking at it and saying, she must have had an impact, because look at the next verse, verses 3 and 4. He did right in the sight of the Lord. Now listen, he didn't get that from his dad. He didn't get it from Ahaz, who's taken one of his brothers, one of Hezekiah's brothers, and offering him up as murdering him as a burnt offering to a false god. He's not getting righteousness from his dad. So, listen, we don't know this. It doesn't say it necessarily, but I think the implications there, I think the fact that she's mentioned here is something. I believe that his mom influenced him in the ways of the Lord. Again, it's extra biblical. It's not something the Bible shows us or tells us. But the fact that she's mentioned, after the fact that who his dad is, it makes sense to me. It makes a lot of sense to me. I would confidently state that she's probably the main influence in him being a godly person. Anyway, let's read this and let's talk a little bit about that. So he did right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father David had done. It doesn't say his father Ahaz, because Ahaz didn't do right in the sight of the Lord. He removed the high places and broke down the sacred pillars and cut down the Asherah. He also broke in pieces the bronze servant that Moses had made, for until those days the sons of Israel burned incense to it, and it was called Nehushtan. So Hezekiah does that which is right in the sight of the Lord. He does that which is pleasing to God. And again, Ahaz is not called his father here. David is called his father because he does what his ancestor David did. He acts like David did in that he follows the Lord with all of his heart. He rejects the idolatry that Ahaz instituted. And like I had said, it's probably his mom that taught him the ways of the Lord. And I'm going to argue that mothers they're so important in the future of their kids, because it is the mother's responsibility primarily to train up the kids in the way they should go. What I mean when I say that is, the father's role is important too. The father, he needs to be part of that. But the mother's role is to teach the children, and she's going to spend the lion's share of the time with the children if the family embraces traditional roles, where the husband would tend to work and support the family, and the mom is with the kids. And so she's with them, and she's influencing them. And as Ahaz is ruling on his throne, who's with Hezekiah? Who's teaching him the way he should go? Not Ahaz. Not Ahaz. By the way, dads, that doesn't mean you should completely bail on your responsibility. You can do a lot of harm there by being an absentee dad. But, moms have influence, and Hezekiah's mother must have had an impact on him in order to overcome the idolatrous ways that his father Ahaz had followed. I suppose it is possible that there's some completely outside influence. I suppose it's possible that Hezekiah picks up a written copy of the word by himself, regardless of where his parents are, and reads it and commits his life to the Lord. I mean, that's what happened in my life. I didn't have a parent that was saved. I didn't have a parent that had any type of godly influence on me. So it's not guaranteed that it was all Abbai, but I'd put my money, again, it's a figure of speech. I don't gamble. You shouldn't gamble. But I'd put, the speech, I'd put my money on Abbai. Over Ahaz, that's for sure. I'd put my money on Abbai on his mother Abijah over Ahaz. Well, anyway, Hezekiah removed all the idolatrous places. And this is a big thing because up until this point, no previous king had removed these high places. But he removes the high places. He breaks down these idolatrous Asherah poles. And he even breaks the bronze serpent that Moses had made. Now, does anyone remember this bronze serpent? Maybe you've been reading in Numbers, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and you just got through that portion of the Bible in your Bible reading plan, and you're like, yeah, it's relatively fresh. Or you just remember it from a year ago. I don't know. Hopefully not 10 years ago. You say, I think I know about this bronze serpent. Who wants to tell us something about this bronze serpent? Oh man, I see basically 3 to 4 hands. I see 3. I want to call on every one of you. It's Brian. It's Brian. I'm going to give Brian a shot here. Go ahead. Physically speaking, yeah. And so how long has it been since you read that account? It's been a while. Oops, you're supposed to say not that long. I was like a month ago. But so this is good. This is good. So I mean, it's good that we have these things. These things, you read the Word of God, and it stays in your mind. And it's not every day you're reading, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy necessarily. But yeah, he hit the nail on the head here. The people were committing idolatry. They were complaining. They're grumbling. God sends these snakes, and they're getting bitten by snakes. And it was an act of faith to look upon the bronze serpent that Moses had made, that God had instructed. You need to look upon this, which was representing basically that they were trusting in God to heal them. But what happens here is that over the years, this thing gets turned into an idol. And you can see how that could happen. This thing gets turned into an idol, and so it had to be removed, even destroyed. And so that's what Hezekiah does. He broke in pieces this historic artifact. That would be like finding the Ark of the Covenant in where was it? In Indiana Jones? It was not Alexandretta. That was the cup. I don't remember where it was. I know the Germans were going after it. It was in Egypt somewhere. I don't know. But anyway, that would be like finding the Ark of the Covenant and breaking it in, maybe not quite that much. It would be like finding the Holy Grail in Alexandretta, was it? And I mean, it really wasn't Alexandretta. The Canyon of the Crescent Moon. That was actually in. I was there. It was in the treasury at Petra, and it wasn't there. But anyway. I didn't get to go inside, unfortunately, but it wasn't really there. But it made a good story. But that would be like finding something important like that. I mean, think about the time frame of this. This bronze serpent that Moses makes in the wilderness. This predates 1406. We're going to call this somewhere between 1446 and 1406. Let's just say 1400. Now look where we are. We're at 715 when Hezekiah begins his sole rule. That's 700 years later. Go back 700 years. What year is it? 2025? Is that the year? It's 2025, right? So go back 700 years from 2000. That's, what is that, 1300? You find something from 1300. You have this piece from 1300, and it's causing the people to, and he just destroys it. And it's called Nehushtan, which is interesting because it just means a piece of bronze. I don't know if that was a term of reverence that its worshipers called it, or Hezekiah was just like, look, all it is a piece of bronze. Let's just break it. It's not an idol. It's not a thing for worship. Hezekiah, 2 Chronicles 31 says that Hezekiah led the people to go up even into the northern territory of Israel that had just been destroyed by Assyria, to go up there and find the idolatrous altars and destroy those altars. And he does that. He does that. So it's not just in Judah. It's let's go up there, let's destroy all these idolatrous places. And so we see a pretty legitimate time of revival, an unprecedented up to that point time of revival. And that's because of Hezekiah's faith in the Lord. Look at verses 5 and 6. He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that after him there was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor among all those who were before him. For he clung to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but he kept his commandments, which the Lord had commanded Moses. Hezekiah loved the Lord. And if loving the Lord is wrong, he don't want to be right. He has faith in the Lord, and that faith shows up in his leadership, and it affects the entire nation. I look at that and I'm like, oh, that America would have a real man of faith in leadership like Hezekiah. I'm talking about a real believer who's willing to act. Now, I'm saying that I don't know that that can really happen in modern politics, in the current state of affairs. But we do have an excellent alternative. I mean, what we have going on right now, I'm not going to say we have a godly leader. Hard to make that claim about either one of these guys in office right now. But our current president comes from within Christendom, and he is the greatest friend the church has had in my lifetime. He is. He is. It's hard not to talk about. He is the greatest friend that the church has had at a time when the enemy was attacking the church big time. You have a guy who comes from within Christendom. Again, whether he's saved or not, I don't really trust anybody who kind of comes under Paula White, and their testimony is based on hearing preaching from Paula White, or that comes from kind of a background of Norman Vincent Peale and the self-esteem movement and all that. I don't know that I can look at that and say that confidently that there's a legitimate gospel coming out of that movement. So I don't know that I can really say that Donald Trump is saved. I don't know that I can say that with any level of confidence. But what I can say is that he's the greatest friend the church has had in the White House in my lifetime, and probably in any of your lifetimes. So it would be nice. It would be nice to have a Hezekiah. It would be nice to have a guy who loves the Lord and clings to the Lord, and it's not just a religious thing, because I think with Trump there's a big religious aspect. There is religion in Trump's background. Is he genuinely saved? That's another question. But Hezekiah, he's a leader who trusts in the Lord, and he's willing to face any consequences. And he puts all of his eggs in one basket, which is the Lord's. Verse 6 says that he clung to the Lord. He has a close relationship with the Lord. It's not just some religious thing. He has a legitimate walk with God. And the passage says that he did not depart from following him. He was faithful to the Lord and to him alone, and he kept the Lord's commandments. Not only did he profess faith, but he lived it out in his life. And listen, a lot of people claim to have faith. A lot of people claim to have faith, but not a lot of people live out that faith. They compromise. We talk about this all the time. They'll do things that match up with God's word as long as it's convenient. This is a guy who's making drastic changes. I mean, there really are some interesting parallels between what's going on in Hezekiah's day and what's going on right now. Some very interesting parallels. But here's a guy in Hezekiah who's willing to make drastic changes that could cause upheaval at a time when you can't afford political upheaval when Assyria is breathing down your neck. This is not like a move of expedience, like, hey, let's do this because it's politically beneficial. It's a move that can cause unrest in a time when you need to bring the people together. Well, he brought the people together, but he brought them together the right way under the Lord. And so you're really seeing something here. In 2 Chronicles 29, we see all types of other reforms that Hezekiah carries out. For instance, and I'm just going to summarize a few things here. We're not going to go there and read it. It might just take too long. He repairs the house of the Lord. He gathers faithful priests to carry out the Lord's work. He takes everything that's unclean out of the temple. He restores temple worship. He hosts a great Passover celebration. He does a whole bunch of other things. And again, this is not politically expedient. This is not like political maneuvering. We're doing this because this is what God says. Now, it may be that Hezekiah could feel the Assyrians breathing down his neck. And that may have been an external circumstance that led him to double down with the Lord. God does that stuff sometimes. God has things happen and brings things into our lives that cause us to think and move us toward him. It may happen, but these are not political moves. These are moves that are spiritual. These are moves that are for the Lord. Hezekiah is a man of faith who brings about revival in Judah. And the Lord is with him and brings great success. Verses 7 and 8. And the Lord was with him. He is with the Lord, and the Lord is with him. Wherever he went, he prospered. And he rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him. He defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory, from watchtower to fortified city. And so we're seeing the ongoing presence of the Lord in Hezekiah's life. Hezekiah's faith brings spiritual blessing. It brings God's presence. And that's an awesome benefit to gain, which is God's presence. But his faith also brings him prosperity. Now, that doesn't mean that if you follow God, you're going to get rich. If you follow God, you may get rich. You may also get your head cut off. This happens in the Bible. So don't make some connection that just because this thing happened, this is the natural result of following the Lord. Some people make that mistake. The prosperity gospel makes that mistake, and they blatantly teach that lie. But it just means that Hezekiah saw prosperity, and that prosperity here is in the context of military prosperity. So he did a lot of great things. And one of the things here that we see is that he rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him. Now, Judah had been paying Assyria money for nearly 30 years. They've been paying tribute money, which is like tax money, which is like almost like tariffs. They've been paying this tribute money since the time of Ahaz, Hezekiah's father, and that may have kept them alive for now, but things have happened in Assyria lately during Hezekiah's reign. So if we're looking at Hezekiah's reign, and we're seeing 715, we're going to call it 715. We're going to call that the beginning of his sole reign. Well, only 10 years after Hezekiah becomes the king, in 705, the Assyrian king dies, and another one replaces him. And that other king is a guy, you know his name. So the first king, the king that dies, is Sargon. The king that replaces him, anyone want to take a guess on the name of the Assyrian king They replaces Sargon during Hezekiah's rule. We read about this guy in the Bible, so it may not be much of a guess. Is that hand still up? Or you? Go ahead. Sennacherib. Now, is Sennacherib, is he an expansionist? Or is he content with, I'm going to stay home and I'm going to just be happy with the land that I have? Or is he like, no, I'm going to build, baby. I'm going to expand Assyria. I'm going to get my money, or I'm going to take over the land. Which one do you think Sennacherib is? Sennacherib's going to want Jerusalem. He's going to want Jerusalem, and he's going to come against Hezekiah. And so there's some political things going on right now. And apparently, right around this time is around the time that Hezekiah says, no, I'm not paying any more money. I'm not paying more money to this guy. And so he rebels against the king of Assyria, and he even deals with the Philistines down in the coastal plains and defeats them as far as Gaza and its territory. And so he has great military victories over these long-time enemies, and we haven't seen this stuff since the time of David. But he does a lot of other great things. For instance, he builds a water tunnel to move water inside the city. When he rebels against Assyria, he knows Assyria's coming. He knows they're coming eventually. And so he moves all the water. He says, why should we leave the water? Why should we let the Assyrian armies come and find water? Let's redirect all that water into the city. And so he builds a tunnel. And I have pictures of this tunnel, but my pictures are terrible. I had my pictures in this presentation, and I'm like, it's dark. I had a flashlight on my forehead, because they give you a flashlight to put on your forehead, and you're wading in water this high, just like ice cold water, but it felt fantastic for some reason at the moment. And they start on two ends of this tunnel, and they basically wrap this thing around using sound to find it. And you can kind of see how curvy it is. But anyway, he builds this water tunnel. Again, not my pictures. You walk through this tunnel, and at different levels, the water is low, and sometimes the water is high. And you're like, oh man, did I make a mistake? I should have worn my swim shorts. Did I make a mistake? And you've got your, what do they call those old man shorts with pockets? You got your cargo shorts, your Bermuda shorts, jacked way up high that you would never wear, like Clark Griswold in The Original Vacation, hoping you don't get them wet. But you go through this. He redirects all this water until it comes out on the other side, way down here at the bottom of the screen, at the Gihon, or the pool of Siloam. He pulls this water in from the Gihon spring, and it ends up way down here. So when the Assyrians come in, there is no water. So these guys aren't going to have an easy time. But the people in Jerusalem, they're going to have water. And so the Assyrians do come back. They come back in 701. And there isn't any water to be had for these guys. And Sennacherib gives his threats, which we'll see about. But Hezekiah's planned for it. He planned ahead. He thought about the situation. He planned ahead. And he also builds stronger city walls. It tells me, listen, this isn't a guy who just said, hey, let's just trust in the Lord and do nothing. He trusted in the Lord and he did something about it. And, the Lord was still a big part of the outcome, but he wasn't going to stand around and do nothing. He was going to prepare for that trouble that was coming. And so Judah has a strong and godly leader in King Hezekiah, and he's a man who loves God and is committed to him. Hezekiah is not perfect. We're going to see that. We're going to see a guy, and by the way, there's no Christian that's perfect. You're not going to look at anybody. No pastor you've ever had, no pastor you ever will have, no biblical writer or famous biblical preacher, none of those guys are perfect. All those guys have sin, every single one of them. Hezekiah is no exception, but he's a man who loves God and is committed to him. He leads his people in revival. He brings them back to the Lord, and God blesses him for it. The question will remain for a little bit here, is this enough? What Hezekiah accomplishes, is it enough to stay God's hand of judgment? God had just kicked the Israelites out of the northern kingdom. Is Hezekiah's revival enough to keep him from destroying Judah? And we'll find out in the coming weeks. But for now, again, consider the great faith of King Hezekiah, a man who trusted in the Lord even in difficult times, a man who was willing to put his life on the line in order to worship the Lord, unfazed by any potential upheaval because of such a dramatic change. And he trusted the Lord with all his heart. And he led the people of Judah in faith. And we need to be people like that. We need to be people like Hezekiah. Now listen, Hezekiah is not the Messiah. What Judah really needs is the Messiah. What they really need is a messianic king. But they have to wait for that king at that time. We don't have to wait. We have him. We wait for his return, which is a glorious thing. He's already come. He's already paid the penalty for our sins. He's already died on the cross for our sins. We wait for the day he comes back and rules. But they were waiting for a messianic king they needed. Hezekiah was not that. But Hezekiah was a person of faith. And we can look at Hezekiah's faith as something of an example where we can be committed to the Lord like he was. Where we can be faithful without regard for the consequences, which is what seems was the case for Hezekiah here. Where we can trust in the Lord even in the most difficult times, even when, like for Hezekiah, the enemy is breathing down his neck. And the easy thing to do is to go and pay him off and maybe even take money from the temple treasuries, from the offerings, and pay off this wicked foreign king, like so many other kings did before him. He said, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. We're going to trust the Lord, and we're going to prepare for what's coming. And we need to do the same thing. Even in difficult times, we need to cling to him and to his truth, and he will cling to you. We need to be people of faith like Hezekiah was a person of faith. And we'll look at his faith over the next few weeks, and hopefully we can look at our own lives and consider how we might be people of faith like Hezekiah was. I'd like to have you take your hymnals and turn to 312. If you're not sure that you're saved,